So, just want to make sure, does everyone have Unity installed? Cool.
What's a
so we
web
can-
page? Something ducks walk on?
I don't know. But we can start out with making a new project, and so I'm just going to make a new one using Unity Hub. We're going to do a 3D project. We're going to name it The Tale of Zalde.
What version? Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Well, 19.2 is.
Yeah, 2019.2 we do have it. Yeah,
That's what?
the last. Now that we're in our new project, I hope that everyone's in there, we're just going to set up a simple scene. If you right click in the hierarchy and you do create a 3D, yes,
3D.
yeah. And you do create a 3D object, you just create a cube. And this cube is going to have a super big scale. Let's do 100, just so that way, oops, sorry, not in the Y. The Y is going to stay 1, but the X and the Z are going to stay 100, so that way we have a giant base plate for us to work on. Yes,
Is
question?
there a reason we use the cube as opposed to like a plane?
No? I like cubes.
That's
Yeah.
We just want to work in an environment.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter how you get the environment as long as you get something really good. And so, yeah, it'll be okay. I'm just do a quick check. Okay, cool. So I have a very short-term memory. So now that we just have our base plate down here, we're going to start with creating our character. And so we are going to place in a capsule. Why is everything so blank?
Yeah. Are you on all this cooking?
There we go.
He's gonna.
And so this capsule is going to be our players, and we want to denote that by creating a new material. Okay, material. That doesn't work.
Create material.
Create. Oh shoot, I'm blind. So if you right click in the assets window and then you go to create material, then you can make a new material and you can name this Zalde_mat because this is going to be Zalde's material. If you click over in the albedo, you can change the color of the material, and then you can drag the material onto Zalde. See, Zalde's over here, he's looking good, but right now he doesn't really do anything, and so we are going to make a new script to let Zalde do all the stuff that he wants to do. So if you right click in the assets window again, and you go to create, and then C# script. We're going to name this script Zalde. We're going to do this, if any of you have taken 216, this is going to be, we're taking more of a class approach right now. And so we're going to make an entire Zalde class and then have things working within the Zalde.
Zalde's inside story?
No, that's Mario and Luigi, or
Yes, it was.
Moria and something?
Lasagna.
Yeah, linguine. And so we have this empty Zalde script. Just want to make sure everyone's up to this point.
Loading.
Loading. You want me to give you guys a moment before I move on? Yeah.
what a coincidence.
Let's take it off.
Where does the material come in again?
It's just to make them look good. You can right click in the assets window, go to create, and then go to material.
Yeah, we want that contrast to be able to see our characters.
Yeah, because right now everything's super bright. So
This is
alright, is everyone at a good point? I'm gonna say that most people are. So now in the Zalde class, we're gonna start by making. Oh shoot, I forgot a step. So before we go into the Zalde class, you need to click on the capsule, and you need to add a new component. You need to add a rigid body to it. Rigid bodies allow your character to start moving around the level. Without a rigid body, it has no physics. And then we are also going to add another component. We're going to add the Zalde class, so that way we don't forget about that later on. And so now that we have those components in there, we can start adding things to the Zalde class. The first thing that we are going to add is a reference
You
to,
said make the capsule a rigid body?
yeah, add a rigid body component to the capsule. The first thing we'll add is a rigid body reference inside of Zalde. This rigid body is going to be the player.
Hey, could you zoom into the script?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, gee, that's really small. There we go. Is that better for everyone?
Yeah, probably.
There. Hopefully should be good. The next thing that we're going to add, actually, no, we'll do that later. So in update, we're going to change this to fixed update, so that way it goes at a constant speed depending on what computer you're using. That way computers that have faster FPS don't run the game faster with an update. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, and so now that we've changed that, we are going to start making Zalde move. Since we made the player variable, you can do player.velocity equals new vector vector 3. And so the velocity of the rigid body is exactly what it sounds like. It's the player's velocity. And we're going to be setting this to, here, I'll first explain this part instead of just kind of saying it.
When I tried to add the rigid body, it doesn't like it.
Can you help me with that?
Yeah, I'll take one.
Cool. And so I just want to show you where I'm about to get this next line of code from. If you go to Edit, Project Settings, you'll see all these different things, and one of them is Input, and you can expand axes, and you can see horizontal and vertical. This is stuff that comes default in Unity. It allows you to essentially have the WASD and the up arrow key, down arrow key, left and right. And it kind of maps it to a axis for you. And so we're just going to use this stuff to make Zalde move.
Hey, Joseph, can you scroll for a second? No, you have all of those, okay. It might be something of Unity is not compiling. Go back to your Unity.
And so now what we're going to put inside of the vector is input. This is referencing the input window that we just saw earlier. Dot get access horizontal. Player dot velocity dot y, and then input dot get access. Alright, and so what this all does is this is getting the horizontal axis value that we saw before and the vertical axis value that we saw before, and we're putting them in the x and the z positions respectively. And then the reason why we just kind of do player.velocity y is so that way if it's falling, or if it's jumping, or if it's or just standing still, it keeps the same velocity that it has at the moment. Whereas this will allow us to make it move around using the WASD and arrow keys. But if we were to just leave this as it is, it's going to go very, very slow because this at maximum has a value of 1 or at minimum a value of -1 depending on what you're pressing. So we want to multiply this by something, and we're going to name this something speed, and we're going to define it up here, public float speed.
Sorry, what was the rest of that player velocity one?
Okay, do that. And so by multiplying it by speed, we'll go faster, and this will also allow us to, if you save and then go back to the inspector window, you'll see speed is now over here, and you can make this whatever you want, like 5. I think 5 is a good value. And I recommend instantiating it in the script as well, so that way, if you ever forget about it, it doesn't do like a null pointer kind of thing. Or, no, it'd be set to 0, I think, which would mean you wouldn't move. Okay. And so that should do that. Is everyone at this point? And now, when you, if you press play, oh, wait, no, that doesn't work. Okay, cool. Oh, shoot, I forgot to mention. You're supposed to reference the capsule with the player rigid body thing in here. So if you just drag capsule from the hierarchy over to the inspector window where it says player, you'll fill in the player variable. And that should allow it to move. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Does anyone not have this right now?
I'm working on it.
My camera's not to the player, so it's somewhere off in the distance.
Yeah, we haven't done that yet. So just kind of move your camera to look at the player for right now, and we'll do the connecting it to the player in a moment.
Or just move the player in front of the camera.
That too.
That'll be your easier thing, because messing with the camera is annoying.
Sure. All right.
Wait, what input are we using for the,
WASD.
how does it know that?
It's in the default values of, if you go to edit project settings, it's an input. So right now, you notice he kind of like wobbled around. If you go to the rigid body property of the capsule, and then we look at the constraints, you'll want to freeze the rotation in X, Y, and Z, so that way it just stays still, and when you move it, it should then stay upright.
Constraints where?
It's in the rigid body of the capsule. And so now he won't turn into a worm.
Is it supposed to go forward?
It should.
It's pretty slow.
You don't have the,
Do you have the speed?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Can you add that up?
So now,
That'd be good.
we're going to make a new script. So if you go to right-click in the assets window, create C# script, and we're going to name this camera follows. This will allow us to have a camera following the player at all times, and we're not just in a weird nether zone. And so then if we open up the script, we're in the camera follow script. We can actually we can get rid of start. That's not helpful. And then we can do, we're going to add a variable to this called target, and this is going to be a public game object target variable. And this will be the target of the camera, the player. We are also going to add, so we want this camera to be along the z-axis of the player. If you want it to offset it in the z, you can add extra variables than what I'm about to add. But right now, since we want it in the x-axis, I apologize. We're going to do public float distance y, and we're going to do public float distance z. And then because we're leaving it in the x-axis, it's just gonna stay there. We're going to change the y distance by 10, and we're going to set the z distance to 10 as well. Distance from target z. Distance from target y. Yeah, cool. And so with this, we'll be able to, if you type in game object with a lowercase g, this refers to the game object that has the script inside of it. So if you do game object dot transform dot position equals new vector 3, because we're going to be changing the position of this camera. You do it to target dot transform dot position dot x, target dot transform dot position dot y, plus the offset that you'll be doing in the y. And then I'm going to expand that. And then target dot transform dot position dot z, plus the offset in the z. that will, since it's on, you can do update or fixed update. I'm just gonna do fixed update to keep it same across everything. This will allow the camera to always be this much in the Y offset from the character and this much in the Z offset from the character.
So you would then give that script to the main camera?
Yes, you can then put that script onto the main camera in the scene, and that will cause the main camera to always follow the character. And then remember to place the capsule inside of the target variable when you do that. And then I'm going to put camera follow inside the main camera. And then I'm going to put the capsule inside of target. And this should... Oh, okay. So you'll notice that the camera, if you didn't change anything about the camera, is kind of just like looking off into the distance, but it is following it, as you can see by the moving landscape when I move the character around. So the camera, if we zoom towards it, I'm just gonna pull them up a little bit. You'll see it's just kind of looking straight ahead. So this is where you get to experiment a little bit and just kind of be like, I want it to look down a little bit. And you can just rotate it using the in-editor rotation tool. And so then if you do that and you try it again, now it's looking down at the ground. I'm just gonna cheat. Oh, okay, so I did 5 and -5. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
this is negative.
I'm gonna start with that.
Would it be easier to just parent the camera?
No, my camera's always falling there.
No, because then when you rotate the capsule, it rotates the camera as well.
I thought we're not working the camera.
Yeah, that because I did that originally, and then rotation.
Are we rotating the capsule?
You will.
Okay.
Yeah, that we get there at some point.
Yeah.
So-
capsule.
Oh, that's something. 5 and -5. There we go. That's a little bit better.
Top down-ish.
Yeah, it's like I don't really know how to describe it because it's not fully top down, but it's angled. It's like the new version of Link's Awakening. And so we're going, now that the camera follow's done, we're just gonna go back to Zalde. And we're gonna keep working on Zalde for a little bit. We're going to make him now rotate in the direction that he's moving. And so the way you would do this is you would essentially get the velocity of the character and then use that to determine where the rotation should be. And so first we're gonna create a new vector 3 called vel. We're gonna do vel equals new vector 3 player dot velocity dot x. The next value is gonna be 0 because we actually don't want we don't want it to turn, like if it's falling down, we don't want it to turn down. So we're just gonna keep y to 0, and then the z value we're gonna do player dot velocity dot z.
Now, go back to your scene.
And that gets the 2D velocity of the character, and then with that, we can do if
And set your rotation to.
vel is not equal to new vector 3 0 0 0 0 0. So essentially, if the player is moving, you want, yeah, so I forgot one small step. I can zoom out if people need that. Yeah, there we go. We need to make one more variable in here. This one's going to be a private variable. Private, this is a quaternion. It's essentially a vector 4. It's a vector with 4 values and it's used for rotation. We're not gonna delve into what it does, we're just gonna use it because that's fun. We're gonna do private quaternion direction. And then we can then set direction is equal to, you do quaternion dot look rotation to get the look rotation function velocity. And what this does is, let's just hover over that, it creates a rotation with the specified forward and upwards directions. So it'll make the rotation in the direction of the velocity, which is what we want. And then we can just set game object dot transform dot rotation equals direction. Yeah, okay, and that should be all we need to do to get it to start turning in the direction that it's moving. Now, you actually can't really see if it rotates because, you know, it's a capsule. So we're going to make something inside of the capsule that will actually be useful later on. If you right-click on capsule and then go to 3D object cube, you'll create a cube inside the capsule. And then change the scale of it. Why am I not getting that? There we go. Change the scale. So when you click on the capsule, it'll show, and you have the movement tool selected. You'll see a green arrow, a blue arrow, and a red arrow. Make sure that this cube gets extended out that way towards the blue arrow, because that is going to be your forward vector. Yeah, that's good. That's nice.
How'd you say to do again?
R's the right?
Yes, R is the hotkey, then there's E for rotation, and then W for moving. So yeah, right-click capsule, 3D object, cube, and then just kind of extend it out in the forward direction. And so now, if you turn this on,
Wait, so extend it what direction?
in the direction of the blue. And then if you press play, you should be able to see it moving in the direction that you specified. Is everyone good? We're gonna move on? Okay. So above all of this stuff, back in the global variables, we are now going to create something called an enum. So if you do public enum power, and then the curly brackets. An enum, if I'm being honest, I don't know how to describe an enum, but they're really cool. You essentially do something like, let's say jump. You want the first ability to be jump, and then you assign it a number, 0.
Jumping?
Yeah, jumping, jump, whatever. Then you say your next ability is going to be sword. Yeah, in a Zalde game. Your next power will be sword, and then your final power will be run. And you just assign these each a number, and then this creates a power enum. And since this is a public enum, you can refer to it in other classes. All right, anyways, so you don't need the numbers apparently. So now that we have the enum, we're going to make booleans. And so these booleans will basically be able to tell if the player has unlocked these powers. So you use private bool power jump, and you want these to be private because you don't want the person implementing this, which would be you, to set these powers to true in the editor. Power sword equals false.
You could also use hiding inspector.
You could, yeah. And then I can show how that works. You can also do, if you wanted those to be public, you could do hide in inspector in public, and that has the same thing,
That
same
hiding,
functionality.
what does the, how far down does the hiding inspector affect?
It only does the next one, right? Yeah.
Oh, it does a bit, well, not big, but
Yeah.
hover cursor over
What's the
power
purpose
run.
of hiding inspector?
Power run.
Right, and then, you know,
The purpose is,
Oh,
so,
the
because
enum.
like, maybe you want something to be public,
Yeah.
to be easily accessible by other classes.
Okay.
You don't want people messing with the
Okay.
inspector.
Alright,
Gotcha.
my,
Okay.
thanks.
yeah, I'm thinking it was expected.
Okay. And then, that's right.
You're doing semicolons, they need to be commas.
Cool. Okay, so now that we have the booleans and we have the enum, we can do
Yes.
a check to see if the player is pressing the button that corresponds to a power and if they've unlocked the power already. So you would do if input dot, and this would be in the fixed update, input dot get key, key code dot space, because we want jumping to be with the space bar. And power jump. And this checks if the player is clicking the space bar and they have power jump unlocked. So now, we're just gonna deviate from this a little bit. And we're going to create a function. Yeah, we're just jumping around a little. We're still inside of Zalde, but we're making a new function inside of Zalde called ground check. This will check if you're on the ground, because you don't want someone to just hold down the space bar and then fly all the way into the air. So ground check is going to be a private function, and it's going to be outside of fixed update.
Ground check.
So you do private bool ground check. Yeah, okay. Inside of ground check, we are going to add a distance float variable. And then we're going to add a vector 3 direction variable.
Why 1.1?
I mean, well, you know, I'm gonna do 1 right now, and then we'll see later, because this was an issue that I had earlier today. In direction, we're going to do 0, -1, 0. And so, inside of ground check, essentially what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a raycast downwards with a distance of 1. And then if it detects something is below the character, it says, hey, you can jump. If it doesn't detect something is below the character, it's like, hey, you can't jump.
Oh, I see why there's no
And so, the direction vector that we made, -1 means 1 downwards. And then we can do a statement. If, to create a raycast, you do physics.raycast. And then you do player, dot position, direction, distance. And so what this line of code is doing is it's creating a raycast at the player's position in the direction that we specified, which is 1 down, or just down, with the distance that we specified, which is 1. And so it's going to create the raycast, and then if the raycast hits something, this is going to return true. And so if you want to make it easier to read, you could do == true, or you could just leave it alone by itself. Both of them are perfectly acceptable. If it does return true, you want the function itself to return true. But if this returns false, you don't really need an else. You can just do return false.
Wait, what?
Yeah,
So
so,
just return the raycast then?
you know what, Jimmy, that's a genius idea.
That is nice.
So you could do this, or you can just return the raycast itself, and it'll do it.
So it turns a boolean?
Yeah, because this will, the raycast function returns a boolean of whether or not it hits something. Smart. Now inside of the if statement that we made earlier, where it detects if you're pressing space and if you have the power, you can do if
Actually, I don't know.
ground check,
Kind of hold this in
and then if there is ground below your player, you want the player to jump, which is essentially just saying player.velocity equals a new vector 3.
What do you mean?
You want it to still have the velocity that it had before. We're gonna just do speed for now, and then player.velocity.z. And so you're keeping the velocity of the x and the velocity in the z the same when you jump, but you're changing the velocity in the y by a value. I put in speed because we already have a float variable, but if you wanted a separate value for jumping specifically, I'm going to go up to the public variable, the global variables, and do public float jump height. I'm just going to set that to like 10. And now I'm going to scroll back down, and I'm going to replace this speed with jump height, so that way we can actually have a different value for our speed and our jumping. Alright, so now that we have jumping in place, we need something to actually unlock the jump ability. And so we are going to create another script
camera.
called, what did I name this one?
Set the rotation up. Jump power.
No, because this one we actually want, this is going to be a class that is going to be relevant for multiple powers.
Power, like a
It's going to be multiple powers. I mean, you could call it powers, but I'm going to call it activate power.
But is it relevant for all powers?
Yes.
That-
And so in activate power,
I guess so.
yeah, it's going to be a new script. Because this is going to be a new object that, it's going to be like Pac-Man, where when you grab the object, it's going to give you this power now. So,
Awesome, you're already caught
Is
up.
there a reason that,
so inside
that-
of activate
It's going
power,
from one side to the other immediately.
you're going
is
to
it supposed to
add
fall as well?
Yeah.
a game object
Oh
variable.
wait, your guy's falling over, wait. We try to walk while spinning.
And you're going
Because you
to
have modular
add
rotation.
a
Well,
reference
I'm
to
surprised he's
the
standing.
enum
yeah, he knew.
that you made earlier.
Every time.
And then, oh, we can also get
No,
rid of
yeah,
update,
that's,
because
that,
update is
he
on
wasn't here when we did that.
activate power.
I'll get to it in a second.
Okay. And so, yeah, we got rid of update because activate power doesn't need it. But, so activate power is going to be like a little pellet that the character eats. And so it's going to be a trigger, essentially. So you want on trigger enter. This is something that's built into Unity. It will call this function whenever something enters the trigger area. And so on trigger enter, you need to check if this other is the player. Oh, no, not that.
Make sure you put the zest.
If
I did.
other dot game object, to get the game object, is equal to the player, which is that. Then you can do player dot get component Zalde. Active. What did I do? What did I name that function?
I'm gonna add a function for that.
Did I not do that?
I don't think you did yet.
Oh wow, I'm really not in order at all.
Oh, we'll do your other thing, go back to you. Just click on the
Thanks for
capsule.
pointing that out to me.
Go to the rigid
Okay, so
body.
we have to jump back to Zalde.
Constraints,
Yeah.
drop down for constraints.
Cool.
Go to the bottom three. Now he won't tilt onto his sword.
And so back in Zalde, we're going to make another function, and this one's going to be called active power. And this is essentially going to activate whatever power that you pass it, so the parameter is going to be the power enum. And so inside of here, we want this to be modular. You want it to work with whatever powers you want it to pass it in the future. And so this isn't just gonna work for just the jump, it's not gonna work for just the sword. You'll have an if statement, and it'll do if the power that you're passing it is equal to power.jump. You set power jump to true, no, to true. And then you can just copy paste that because I'm lazy. And then change those to sword and run. Sword, and run. Alright.
We didn't finish an activate power yet, did we?
No, we did not. I had to jump over here and make active power because I forgot that part. And so now we're gonna go back to activate power.
One is the other.
Okay.
And so, in what we were just writing before, you do the get component Zalde dot active power, and then you pass it the power variable that is inside of activate power. And then you want this to be a pellet that's picked up and then just disappears. So after it does that, you do destroy game object. And so that should all be what we need. Yeah, that should be everything we need to activate the powers in the player. And so now if we go back to our editors.
Can you go back for one? Oh, you got, never mind.
We're going to create a new cube inside of the game. So this cube right over there, that's going to be the thing that gives us our jumping ability. So you'll see it has a box collider. You need to set is trigger to true over here. So that way you can actually go through it and then cause it to activate the thing.
I'm assuming we put power on.
And then you do the the class that you made, the activate power.
Put the wall on
And then you need to drag the capsule over to where it says
Power
player,
tree.
so that way it can reference the player
there.
character. And then you'll notice in the variables, this power thing, since it's connected to the enum, you can actually see the different powers that you put in the enum, so jump, sword, and run. And then this should work. You can jump right now.
Doesn't work. Swing out a bunch as you move. Oh, wait, is it all? There's door.
Okay, so everyone's got jumping, I'm assuming? Cool.
Can I just hang off the ledge with my sword?
So now the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to create an enemy. And the enemy is also going to be a capsule. I'm gonna bring him up here, I'm gonna bring him over here, I'm gonna bring him over here. And with the enemy, we're going to do a similar thing to what we did with the player character and put a cube inside of him, so that way we can tell which way he's facing. And then once again, make sure that the cube is facing the same blue direction that the player had it. It's slightly smaller. And then to make things actually stand out, I'm going to make a couple more materials the same way we made the other one. This is optional, of course. This is just going to be enemy
I'm making my
mat.
enemies super different and creative in a way.
How far are you in total?
Did you say how or are we?
So now that's in there.
Create material and then you just.
And so inside the enemy capsule, we need to add a rigid body, so that way it can also move.
Okay. Click on the white.
And then just like the player rigid body, we're going to freeze the rotation, so that way it doesn't fall over. And then we also need a class for the enemy, which will be a C# script that we just call enemy. And we can open it up after rigid body script. We're good. And so inside of the enemy is going to do a couple of things. The enemy is going to be looking at the player, and the enemy will follow the player if the player is close enough to the enemy.
High level AI.
Yes. Has terrible pathfinding, but better than some of the stuff I've made before. And so, because we want it to be able to follow and look at the player, we need a reference to the player. And so we'll make public rigid body player, which will be a reference to the player. And just like the Zalde, we need to also have a reference to itself, which I'm just calling self. And then, also like Zalde, we need a speed. And then, since we said that we're going to have it do this if the player is close enough to the enemy, we need to create a radius for that, which I'm going to set to 5. And then we also want the enemy to have health. So we're going to create health and we're going to set it to 1. Good at this point. And so we're just gonna change update to fixed update, and then we're gonna get rid of start, just like we've been doing. And so, the first step is to locate where the player is relative to the enemy. And you do this by creating a vector between them. So you do vector3 player lock equals player dot position minus game object dot transform dot position. And you could also technically do self dot position, but it doesn't matter. And then, because we don't want the enemy to be looking up at the player, like let's say the player went on top of a ledge, you want to set player lock dot y equal to 0. So that way it's never gonna take that into account. And so now we can check to see if the player is close enough to the enemy using if player lock dot magnitude is less than the radius that we created. And then we'll have him face the player. We're gonna use quaternions one more time. Quaternion direction. And then we'll set direction equal to quaternion dot look rotation player lock. And so this will cause it to actually face the player at all times. And then game object dot transform dot rotation is equal to the direction, and so that actually changes the rotation value. The direction is just what it needs. And then we want it to move forward in the direction that it's facing the player. So we move forward vector3 velocity equals game object dot transform dot forward. And then, just like the player, we need to multiply this by the speed. And then we use self.velocity equals L. We are going to move on to making sure the sword works. And so if you go back into your editor, you can go over here. So this giant stick that we made coming out of the player character, we're going to turn this giant stick into the sword. And we're also going to color it, so I'm just going to make a new material for that. Nice and quick.
And then turn off the rotations on for.
Oh yeah. It's gonna be a sword, purple sword, whatever that is. And so this sword, we're going to use tags to reference the fact that this is a weapon that we can use against the enemies. So when you click on the cube that is coming out of the player, you'll see this thing called tag up in the top right corner. If you click that and then you do add tag, it'll say list is empty, and then you just press the plus button right here. And you can add a new tag, and we're going to call this player
What's the name, the cube?
Yeah, the cube coming out of the player.
Where do you go to add tag?
So cube, tag, add tag, and then it will pop up in the tag list. And you can set the tag of the cube to player weapon. Everyone's got it? Cool. So now that we have a tag for player weapon, we can go back into the script for the enemy. And we can do, oh, I forgot one thing, I'm sorry. So also in the cube, we need to set this to a trigger. So one, we don't want the sword to actually affect collision. If you run into a wall, you want the sword to just kind of go through the wall. You don't want it to stop you. And we also don't want it to like kind of slam enemies away. We just want it to like go through them and stab them. So we're setting the sword to a trigger, and that will allow us to do that. And so now that it's a trigger, we can also, inside of enemy, do private void on trigger enter, just like we used before. And then we check if the other tag, the other thing's tag, is equal to player weapon. Then you lower the health. And then you just do another check. If health is less than 1, you destroy the enemy, which is the game object.
Health does end right here.
Say what?
Is health end?
Health is, I think I made it, yeah, it's an int.
Okay.
Yeah, health is an int.
If it's like what? Equal, but less than equal.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so now, I think, yeah, that is everything for the enemy class. So does anyone have any questions about the class itself?
So now we attach that script.
Now we can attach the script to the enemy, and it should function as it should. Enemy has the script in it.
Yeah.
So then you need to drag the player, and the enemy.
Well, I also increase rigid body.
So what?
I don't think we ever added rigid body to the enemy.
I did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
It's just what if there's
Now you can see the enemy is following me whenever I get close to it. But if I whack him with my stick, he dies.
Don't you only want to do that if you have the sword?
Yeah. So what?
Don't you only want to do that if you have the sword?
That's the next part.
Ah.
But right now you know the sword is functioning, so we can now do the invisible sword thing.
Yeah, that's fine.
Alright, we're going to add
And also, I
one
don't know
more
how to model
variable
it.
to Zalde to make sure that the sword's not always sticking out. You actually have to get the power up, and then you need to click to activate the sword.
Oh god.
So by adding a variable, it's going to be a public game object sword. And then we go down into the,
You said game object?
yeah, it's gonna be public game object sword. And then we go back down into fixed update underneath our space and jumping thing that we did before. We'll do something very, very similar. We'll do input.getKey keycode.mouse0. That corresponds to your left mouse button. And power sword. Then you do sword dot get component.
You said mouse 0?
Yes. Mesh renderer dot enabled equals true. And then do the same thing, but for the box collider. Else. Sword dot get component.
Can you just toggle the whole
Yeah.
thing? Like the whole sword?
Is there a toggle?
I believe so.
I think it's if you enable the game object.
You don't want to do that because if you, well,
Go to Unity real quickly.
I've had issues before with toggling the game object itself, so I'm not entirely sure if that's something we want to do.
Okay.
But if you want to try that out and you want to just toggle the game object itself and do sword.enabled, try it and tell me if it works.
You can also probably do visible and then just check the visible flag.
Yeah, that too.
And visible might still be.
Yeah, oh yeah, visible doesn't change anything. It just
The
changes
trigger's still, yeah, trigger's still exists.
Yeah, but you could just
Zoom in?
choose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
there
you go.
No,
So now what this should do is, oh wait, no, that didn't work for me. Capsule. Yeah, and so then you'll see that sword hasn't been instantiated, so then you have to just set it in there. Yeah, did not realize that. And so now you don't have a sword, so if you go close to the enemy will chase you and you have no way to stop it.
Where is the...
And I can't jump
You gotta activate it.
It's like sword
I'm
dot
not sure if I was doing
active
it.
true.
Yeah, so like for our music thing, one time,
So it'll be
my
sword
project
dot
crashed. And then,
set active,
I just got used to pressing
Yeah.
Control S
And then that's all you need.
all the time.
and then you can
Without me noticing.
I like that.
Where's that?
Did I not make a scene or something?
So if you go.
Sometimes it doesn't load as music on the
Alright,
scene.
so I'm just have that in there.
Cool.
It's a nicer way to do
And just turn.
We've lost minimal work.
Wait, for set active.
We've lost
that. Yeah, that's an alternative way to do
Do
it.
we actually?
Yeah.
Thank you, Bailey. Now, if you want the player to be able to get a sword, you just duplicate the activate power cube that you made earlier. But this new one, instead of it having jump in the power, you just set sword.
I'd take 2 seconds.
And so if you do that, and then you play, I don't have a sword, I go in and touch that. Now that pops up.
We're like a lazy.
Okay, so now we're going to do a pressure plate that moves a door. And it's super simple because it's only one script this time.
False.
So everyone has the sword ability working, they can kill their enemy, everything's good.
No.
No?
No, mine got deleted. It yo'd itself out of existence, it's fine.
Okay. Glad it's fine.
I understood it though.
Cool. So now we're gonna go back to the editor, and in the assets menu, you can do create C# script, and then we are going to name this one plate, because it's gonna be a pressure plate. And so in the plate script, we are going to get rid of both update and start because they are useless for a pressure plate. We are going to make a new game object variable called door. We're going to make, so we want the door to change position, but depending on what the instance we're using this pressure plate in and the door, we're going to want the position it changes to be variable every time because we want this to be a modular object. So we're going to also make a public vector3 of how much the door changes by. And for right now, we're just going to do new vector3 0, 5, 0. And then we want a boolean to know if the pressure plate has been activated. And then with the pressure plate, we're going to use private void on collision enter. This is different from trigger enter because with trigger enter, you are required to have one of the colliders set to is trigger, and is trigger does weird things like it has no collisions. Whereas with on collision enter, this is like if I was to hit my laptop, it detects on collision enter. And so on collision enter, we then do if the collision dot game object has the component Zalde and the pressure plate has not been activated. We change the transform of the door by the position change. And then we set activated to true because you activated it. We'll go back into the editor window. We are going to create another cube. Here, here, there. There's our pressure plate. And so in the pressure plate, we are going to add the plate script that we made. I'm also going to make a material so that way you can actually see the pressure plate. Nope, that is a lens flare. Delete. Create. Material. There we go. I'm just gonna make it gray. And then we are also going to do another cube. This cube. We're just gonna pretend that there are walls around that so that way you can actually not Okay, your power-ups. Yeah, that's good enough. And so we're going to reference the door with the door object.
Wait, so all you did from after you made the plate, you just made 2 cubes?
Yeah, so I made a plate cube and I made a door cube, which are just cubes. Door doesn't have any special scripts in it. Oh, but what it does need is door needs a rigid body. Door needs a rigid body and it needs to have use gravity off and it needs to have is kinematic on. What kinematic does, I'm pretty sure, is it basically makes it so that way you cannot enable any forces on that object. So like if you run into it, it's not gonna fall over. If you had like, let's say wind forces, I don't think wind is going to affect it. What it's useful for is, though, you can still move it by calling the rigid body with something else and then forcibly moving the rigid body. And so now that should move the door, instead of in the Y direction, I'm gonna move it like -5 to the left.
Now I can jump.
Yeah.
Joke's on you, door.
So that should
Can you
work.
jump over your door?
No.
Like ours.
There we go.
I keep shoving my sword into the door.
Powers, and then it kills the guys. And then if you go over
Look,
again, it
the
does
new
not
medicine.
close it out again.
It's called door holding.
If an enemy weapon hits me, then I die.
Oh well.
It's actually good.
But
As in you just get
this
deleted.
power cube would not be an enemy weapon.
What?
Yeah, I just deleted you also. Attack each strike.
Oh, I did it well with you, I think.
Breath of the Wild has never looked so good.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I don't care for now, all the only sound I feel about this.
Actually, this one is Zalde's Sleeping.
Oh.
Sleep.
No, it's Zalde. The main character of the Tale of Zalde is Zalde, as it should be.
Yeah. Clearly.
Yeah.
I sleep.
We're gonna start working on teleporters here.
Oh, no, what now?
Teleporters.
Alright, so first thing is we need two cube assets. But what we want to do here is just take one cube and duplicate it later. So for this one, I'll make the teleportation pad.
And give it a material. Because
Yeah, I'll give it a material. Yeah, white is what you see. Let's make a large pad here.
You said create 2 cubes?
Well, one.
just
but
create one.
One, I'll duplicate it later. And then, yeah, I'll just duplicate this one. That's not really this.
Control D.
Control. Alright. So this is. I'll make the source pink and
I like that.
destination green.
I like that one.
I'll move it into a single. So I just moved my source and destination pads to the new empty object. You don't have to do this.
So your teleport is only 1 lane?
Yes.
Okay.
Because if I try to do it 2 ways, it'll just flip flop indefinitely, which is not great. Unless I do some more, add some more code like detecting when you exit the teleport. Yeah.
Or you could put a delay on between when you could do, when the teleport's
The easiest way is to make it teleport to a location that's slightly offset from the
Yeah,
teleport, but
yeah.
it
Are
doesn't.
they in a group?
You just, yeah, you
One
just
way
made an
teleport.
empty object and then put them, you
So
don't have
for
to.
both, actually I should have done this before I duplicated, but for the source and destination telepads, I want to set them both to triggers. And in the source, we can add a new component, which is going to be script. We'll call it the teleporter. And be sure to attach the teleport script to the source pad.
You said create a teleport script?
Yes.
To the what?
To the
for the first one?
Yeah, attach the teleport script to the source pad, like the one where you're teleporting from.
Also, I
Well,
like. Do what? Can we like?
So this will be pretty standard. We just need a private method, private void on trigger enter. And all we really need here is other dot. Oh, hold on. I forgot something real important. We want a public game object destination. This is what the second pad was for, so we know where to teleport to.
Dude, anything that touches this teleporter is getting healed.
So where did
Anything that
start?
touches this teleporter gets healed.
Actually, this is not quite here. We also need an offset script, an offset value, like from where you stepped on the source teleporter, and make sure the position matches in the destination. So we want the offset to be the So this will pretty much say that we're taking the position of the current teleporter pad, which is the source, and subtract it from the object colliding with it to get the offset from the center of this object to the collided object. And then we apply this distance offset to the destination minus offset. And thus we'll just simply teleport anything that enters the area.
Wait, so why are we subtracting by offset?
So that way, since we have our teleport is a very large square pad. So this way, if we enter from the top left corner, we also appear in the same top left corner. Likewise with the bottom right.
1 or 2.
We can
The other teleport.
we can make this just teleport to the center of the thing if we just offset by the y value.
Just put another.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we'll just walk here. Oh, it did not work. Something went wrong.
Did it work for you?
Did you attach the script?
I'll make this.
I did not save, that's the thing.
Oh, that's, yeah, that'd be bad.
I did not save. Is to go back to your source telepad and attach the destination pad to the teleporter script. And that should work.